Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to Stuff at a Fantasy Basketball Podcast, a very special episode, one that I've probably been wanting to do for a couple of years, hasn't lined up, but we are here. Now, today's episode, before I bring in my guest, is brought to you by FanDuel, is brought to you by Fantrax, and is part of the Old Man Squad. Remember, jump over into the YouTube land there and give us a like and a thumbs up and same on Spotify, do all of that stuff that makes us grow. Adam Stock, welcome to the show. We're going to talk about punting. I do feel like this has been coming for a while.
I agree. I feel like we're the two guys in the industry who are the most pro punting. So I feel like this is something that needed to happen.
Yeah, I think if there's one person that likes punting as much as me, it's you. So, should be no issue with us talking about punting for, well, it could go for a day, but it's not going to go for a day. We'll try and limit it a little bit. Now, before we jump in, I mean, where can people find you and your stuff?
You can find me at elitefantasybasketball.com or Adam G Stock on X. We're dead smack in the middle of all the preseason content coming out. I don't put it out in October. It's kind of like a rolling thing, all starting at the end of August all the way up to October. I'd say new things coming out nearly every day, and a lot of them are pretty beefy. Like you get some really extensive punting guides, pairing guides. There's rankings for all different types of settings and leagues. So really, regardless of like what kind of fantasy basketball you play, there's some good stuff for you there.
Yeah, so look, I mean, if you're watching along and you haven't punted before, and we sort of wet your whistle a bit and get you excited about punting, I know you have a ton of punting guides as part of your content. So yeah, go and check all of that out. Let's start at the top, I suppose, for those people that haven't punted. And I mean, other people have done punting shows. I know this is one of the things that's drummed into people, I suppose. But what exactly is punting? Because it isn't. I guess what people might think in terms of it's not completely dismissing a category and saying I can't draft someone who gets assists or I can't draft someone who gets rebounds. What's a simple way of explaining punting in your words?
Yeah, the definition is ignoring a category to strengthen yourself in the other 8 categories. It doesn't mean chasing guys who are bad in that category. It's a pretty key difference. The way I look at it is when I punt a category, the first thing I think about is which players gain a lot of value. So we'll do free throw percentage because it's the easiest to understand. So you think when you ignore free throw percentage, who goes out? You got Giannis, obviously, and then you got guys like Walker, Kessler, Pirtle. So think about guys like Kessler and Pirtle. Like, what are they good at? What are they bad at? So you know they're going to be good in the big man categories, and you know they're going to be bad in the guard categories. So from there, you start thinking not about who's going to gain that, which guards are going to gain value when free throw percentage is ignored, but which guards can complement those bigs. So that's kind of how I look at it. So I start looking for guards who are good in points, threes, assists, and to a lesser extent steals, and kind of go from there. And that might mean that I pick some guards that shoot 86% from the line. In my opinion, before Luka came around, the best guard for this build was actually Steph Curry. Not so much these days because he's dipped, but in his prime, he was a dream fit for punt free throw percentage. Not because he would gain value, he'd obviously lose a significant amount of value, but because he gave you everything that those traditional punt free throw percentage bigs didn't give you.
Yeah, and as you said, it is a way for me. Like I know when I punt, it's such a good way of finding value where there may not be value for other managers. So obviously you add a punt category, you add 2 punt categories, value shifts, and someone that's, I guess, if someone is drafting based off rankings, there might be a player who's the 60th ranked player, so they're targeting him in the, I don't know, 5th or 6th round, something like that. But if you punt 1 or 2 categories, maybe that, if again, looking at rankings, which aren't everything, they move up to be the 30th ranked player or something. So it does mean you can then draft that person maybe a round early. It doesn't mean you want to go and draft that player in the 3rd round, but you can draft them in the 4th or 5th round and you're okay with it. So yeah, as you said, it's just not worrying about a category or 2 categories. not concerning yourself with those. Which, I mean, for me, that makes drafting a little bit easier because you're not worried as much. You're not worried about 9 categories. You're worried about 8 or 7 or 6 or 5.
Yeah,
Depending.
yeah. Your draft board is going to look completely different, which is a pretty big advantage versus the guys who are kind of at the mercy of the rankings. And I think you made a really good point these days about just easier to find value. These days, the rankings are pretty tight in general. Like I would say the Yahoo rankings are a little wild right now, but they'll tighten up by the end of the season. So like 10 years ago, it used to be a little bit wild west. You'd have like top 60 guys going like 120. Yeah. But these days, if you're not punting, it's going to be pretty hard to find value.
It is, yeah. And you'll find that, yeah, like multiple managers are chasing the same player in a certain range, and you can just ignore that player altogether. Now, when do you decide to punt? So coming into a draft, whether it's a slow draft or a fast draft or whatever it is, I guess there's sort of, well, there's a few schools of thought, but generally speaking, you either come into a draft with a punt strategy, or you decide on that strategy after picking 1 player or 2 players or 3 players. What is the way that you do? Do you wait until you've landed a couple of players and then decide which direction to take, or do you come into a draft with a sort of a strategy in mind before you've even drafted?
Kind of in between. I would say I come into a draft with a preferred punting strategy. So I'm not going to just come into a draft with one strategy. So let's say I'm drafting Luka. I'm probably going to either punt free throw percentage or punt field goal percentage. In my opinion, I'd rather do punt free throw percentage for reasons I want to talk about now. But I'm not going to decide on that right away. Like I'll usually limit it down to a couple moves, and then by the time the second, third round comes around, then I'll have a better idea. But even in most builds, you don't have to decide that early. You can still wait until like maybe the 5th, I would say, before 100% locking in. It kind of depends on the build as well. Something like punt points, you can get locked into early, because if you start taking people like who are like Zubac, Gaiman, guys like that, who average like 15, 16, then you can get you can get pigeonholed a little bit. But in other builds, like stuff that's dependent on threes, like if you have a bad 3-star, you don't necessarily have to punt threes. You have a little more time to decide on that.
And I think a little bit of it for me, as you said, points is one that you can sort of lock in early. Assists, potentially another one, because they're generally harder to find later in drafts. So there are certain categories which are easier and harder depending on where you're looking. I'm a little bit like you in that sort of in between. Although for me, part of punting is, where am I drafting? So if I'm drafting pick 2, I'm not really going to decide on a punt strategy, because I'm going to get Shea or I'm going to get Jokic, so I'm going to get a player that you can sort of be flexible with, because they're good in so many categories. This season, I've talked about with other guests the fact that once you get into sort of pick 7, 8 through to 12, that you can make a case for about a dozen players to take it for example, at pick 9. And because then obviously the closer you get to pick 12, the closer your picks come together. So if you're picking at pick 11, you also then get pick 14. So you can almost come up in your mind, you can almost come up with a pair of players that you want to draft. It's a little bit easier than if you're picking at pick 3, you're then getting pick whatever that is, 22. You don't really know who's going to be available to you at 22. So for me, if I'm drafting later, if I'm sort of going in the back end of that first round, I don't mind coming up with a punt strategy straight away and sort of saying, okay, I'm going to take Trae Young and, I don't know, James Harden or something, and I'm really going to lean into some guards. Does that, in your mind, does that sort of make sense? Am I just on an island there?
Oh, no, I agree 100%. I was going to jump in and say, I think some of those late first round guys almost force you into builds, especially punt field goal percentage. That's kind of one of my issues with the late first this year. All those guards are just obvious punt field goal percentage guys, especially in 9 category leagues where you have to worry about their turnover rate. Like, I'm fine with punting field goal percentage and turnovers, but I generally don't want to punt something like threes and turnovers just because they don't really matchups. So yeah, that's definitely true. For example, you brought up Trey. I don't know what else I would punt with Trey besides field goal
Yeah.
percentage. It doesn't really make sense. So in that case, it's definitely go all in on it and make sure your second round pick complements him in punt field goal percentage.
So, like, I mean, I'll sort of skip over one of our topics here. We'll come back to it. But you said there, like, you can obviously punt a couple of categories. Not you don't really like to punt threes, for example. Punting multiple categories. Now, it's something that I do a lot. I'm probably going to say that I do it more than anyone, only
You
because
do for sure, for sure.
I'm super comfortable punting 4 categories. I have no issues with it at all. It's not a strategy I sort of openly recommend and say you need to go and do this. I have no idea why I do it, but I'm certainly open to punting rebounds, blocks, field goal percentage, turnovers. So, which I guess if we wanted to categorize categories, they're your big man stats. They're what your Walker Kesslers, who you mentioned earlier. That's what they're good at. They're good at getting blocks, rebounds, good at field goal percentage, and they don't turn the ball over. So maybe that's why I do it. It's sort of, I guess, it's a guard punt or a big punt, and I that's probably my, I won't say favorite punt, but I tend to do it a lot, and that is where I just draft a lot of guards and a lot of bigs who give you guard-ish stats. So big men that don't necessarily block. They hit threes. Their field goal percentage, I don't care about if they're shooting 7 threes a game. Assists are tougher to get when you're looking at bigs. Do you punt multiple categories very often, or are you more of just a 1 or maybe 2?
To start the year, I'm 1 or maybe 2, and then when the playoffs come around, then I start tightening up a little bit. For example, last year in my 2 main leagues, I got first in one league and 5th in the other in the regular season, but I decided to implement the same strategy at the end of the year. I was rolling with something that was kind of like punt threes and punt free throw percentage, and then at the end of the year, just before the playoffs started, I was like, okay, I'm going all in on the 3 big man categories: turnovers and steals. And it worked perfectly. I won both. It was just, okay, I already have a huge head start in 4 of those categories. And then with steals, there's always going to be guys like Keon Ellis, Cason Wallace on the wire. So it's not hard to find like elite guys in that category.
Yeah.
So that's an approach I take quite a bit. And it actually kind of makes me biased towards some of the big man builds because it's easier to switch to that build.
And that's actually an exact strategy I did last year. I don't know if it was for the first time, but going with that big man build, so the opposite to the guard build that I just mentioned. So actually chasing field goal percentage, blocks, rebounds, and just by, I guess, drafting those players, your team is naturally going to be good at turnovers because you're drafting players that don't have the ball in their hands a lot. And then it's what is that swing category? So what is the 5th category you can get with those bigs? And for me, it was steals as well. There are some, like Anthony Davis is a really good fit for that build because he's elite at steals for a big man. And then I had a lot of Dyson Daniels, a lot of Amen Thompson, Asar Thompson this season will be someone I'll be.
I had like all those guys last year. Those were all like my key guys. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I do like that build as well. One thing I would just say though, if you're punting multiple categories and the more you punt, I think the more this becomes relevant. Don't expect to finish first in your league.
Okay.
If it's a head-to-head each category league where you win 6-3 or 7-2, because you're really never going to win 7-2 or 6-3. Maybe you might luck into free throws one week or something like that. But generally speaking, you're probably going to finish 4th or 5th, as long as you and for me that's usually what happens. I finish middle and then I win just purely because I can beat every team 5-4.
Yeah, that's kind of why I start by punting less categories at the beginning of the year and then kind of narrow it down, the categories I'm targeting as it does go on, because I find you can kind of get yourself into trouble with that, especially these days where you're almost certainly going to have like a 2-week stretch in December, January, where you have like 6 guys out. And
Yeah.
if you're doing a quadruple punt or something like that, and you're winning 5-4 every week, you can have like 10 wins just wiped out in those 2 weeks by a couple of 7-2 losses. I remember, I think it was 3 years ago, someone in my league did that. Went for the quadruple punt approach. They finished either second or third in total wins and missed the playoffs by like 8 games. Because that exact same thing happened. They won 5-4 every week. They had like a 3-week bad stretch in January, just out of their control. They couldn't do anything, and they just couldn't make it up.
Yeah, that's true. That is the downside. You do open yourself up to losses like that. I guess in my mind, that to counter that to some degree, it doesn't always work, is the fact that you are so strong in those categories. And this is sort of why I sort of lent into it, I suppose, more so the last 2, 3, 4 years. As we know, injuries, rest, management, all of that stuff, that's happening a lot. But if you lose, like, for example, was it last year? Yeah, it was last year. Anthony Davis, as I said, my number one pick in that specific build, he obviously went down with that adductor injury late in the season and missed a sizable chunk. I was so far ahead in those other categories because I had guys like Amen Thompson and Dyson Daniels, and I think I had a lot of Walker Kessler, although he missed time as well. But I was far enough ahead that losing Anthony Davis actually, I mean, it impacted my totals, but I was still good enough to win those categories. So that to me is sort of the trade-off. But again, you lose 4 players, then you're pretty stuffed, and you lose 7-2 or 8-1, and you go from 3rd in the standings to 7th in the standings within 3 weeks.
And you also absolutely crushed the draft, obviously, with Daniels and Thompson and guys like that. Not every team's going to be able to do that, especially this year. Like guys like Amen and Daniels were kind of obvious last year. Like this year, there aren't as many obvious. No. This dude could be top 60 and he's 120th.
Yeah, no, there's not. Usually you can find a couple. Last year, I think there were more than a couple. This year, not as many. As I said, Asar is someone I think could, if Detroit use him in a similar way, play him 30, 31 minutes. But yeah, outside of him, there's not a lot. I mean, Dyson to me was a very obvious one last year because he was coming in. He was always going to start. I remember there was some discussion around starting Bogdanovic alongside Trey and bringing Daniel, and that just made zero sense to me. So he was a pretty obvious one, and I think Amen Thompson was sort of an obvious one as well. Not as many this year. So jumping back, favorite punt categories. Do you have? I've sort of said what I like to do, but do you have one? If we were to say you have a default punt, do you have one, or do you again just decide on the fly?
It does change, but in general, I prefer the big man punts. Probably a few years ago, I would have told you punt assists. The last few years, I've kind of gravitated more towards punt threes with kind of punt free throw percentage mixed in. I prefer punt threes just because the bump the bigs that don't shoot threes get these days is just enormous, because now the average to be averaging threes, you got to average like 2.1. So these days, those guys are just harder to roster outside of punt threes, but you put them in punt threes and they just become monsters. So just looking at the rankings, for example, Pirtle last year, 9 category punt threes, 12th, Mark Williams, 10th, Zubac, 8th. So you could get 3 or 4. You could have 3 or 4 first round picks on your roster if you punt threes. So I do prefer that. This year I'm actually finding it a little tricky just because the late rounds don't have a ton of obvious targets for that build, especially in the guard categories. But things are fluid. Things change. It could be a really easy build to go with by the end of the season. The one I tend to stay away from a little bit, at least in 9 categories, not 8 categories, is punt field goal percentage. Just because you're probably going to be competing with like 4 or 5 punt field goal percentage teams, especially this year with the back end of the first being punt field goal percentage guard heavy. So that one, I don't recommend too strongly unless you have to. So if you got Trey, then you kind of got to do it. But let's say you got Luka, you got options, probably won't do it.
Yeah, so I'm just again, I'm looking at the rankings here, and that's. I think last year, the last couple of years why I've sort of liked that big man build as well, because someone, as you said, like a Mark Williams, Jakob Poeltl, and you had Walker Kessler in there. They're guys that certain managers will hedge away from because of the fact that they don't really score a lot of points. They don't hit any threes. It's not like they hit 0.7. They hit 0 threes. They don't even take threes, really. So people will sort of naturally just think, well, no, I need to draft someone who's getting me at least 1 3 a game. So they'll just hedge away from those players. And meanwhile, you're happy to take someone like a Jakob Poeltl in the 5th round or 6th round, and you're quite comfortable with that. So yeah, I would say my favorite would be, as I said, that either just a guard build where I chase guards, or alternatively going that big man with steals build. Punting points, I think, is a strategy that's come into sort of fashion, I suppose, over the last year or two. That's another one, I think, where you can find some really good value, because people subconsciously, they just tend to chase points. They tend to look at someone and go, oh, he's scoring 20 a game, like a Cam Thomas, or I don't know, who else is a really good example of something like that? Even a Cam Johnson, Michael Porter Jr., just guys that will get you maybe 20, 22 points, but they don't really help you anywhere else. Those guys tend to go lining up with their ADP all the time. But if you're punting points, you ignore them totally, because they're actually not helping you anywhere else. So what are your thoughts on punt points? Because like I know Dan Bethbridge, for example, who doesn't really punt. He's not a big punt guy, but he doesn't mind punting points. He is a roto guy, yeah. But he likes punting points. What do you think about punting points?
Yeah, I love punt points. I would say probably punt points was almost my default for the first like 5 to 7 years. I did fantasy basketball just because it's probably the only build where you can end the draft with your entire team being top 100 guys in your build. And it's like punt threes where it shakes up the board quite a bit. So anything that shakes up the board really gives you a high ceiling versus something like punt blocks, which I don't mind. But since no guards get blocks, it doesn't really shake up the order as much. You don't get like deals with that build. It's more like, okay, guys like Miles Turner, a lot of the elite shot blockers don't give you much elsewhere, so it kind of like strengthens you elsewhere. But it doesn't, like, you can't really get steals as much in those builds. But yeah, anything where you can just get great value, I love, and punt points is one of those builds.
Yeah, so I've just done over here on Basketball Monster. I've just entered punt points, and it certainly shakes things up. If you look at the rankings before and after, clicking that punt points button. And I mean, I don't want to sort of give away all of Josh's rankings and that sort of thing, but Asar Thompson becomes the 14th ranked player in projections. Yeah. Now, I know obviously that's weighted on certain categories, that sort of thing. But he jumps way up. Miles Turner jumps way up. Mark Williams, Jakob Poeltl, Walker Kessler, those guys that you talked about, those 3 bigs, they all jump inside the first round.
And that's just if you're just punting one category. You pair punt points with punt free throw percentage, which makes a lot of sense, or punt points and punt threes, and those guys are like 5th.
Yeah. So if I throw in punt free throws, Walker Kessler is the 4th ranked player. Jakob Poeltl is 7th. Evan Mobley is there. Rudy Gobert, who I think we would argue was pretty trash last season. He moves up to be the 9th ranked player simply because he doesn't score, he doesn't hit threes, but he'll get you 12 and 12 with 1.4 blocks and shoot like 70% from the field. So,
those double punts with points is something I usually move to just almost like naturally during the season. Yeah. Just because I'm a sucker for defensive numbers. I'm kind of a sucker for bigs. So even if I'm not planning on punting points, when February comes around, I'm like, oh, I'm punting free throw and points. I didn't even notice, kind of. It's like I haven't won points for 6 weeks. So let's lead into this kind of deal.
Yeah, and I think as we said right at the top of the show, if you're punting categories, it doesn't mean you're just like avoiding them, because even if you punt points, as I said, I've punted points and free throws here, Wembanyama, Jokic are still number 1 and number 2. So even though for Jokic especially, you would consider field goal percentage, points to be strengths. I mean, he's got a lot of strengths, but to not weaknesses by any means. He's still the number 2 projected player. Even Shea, who who doesn't, he's obviously a guard, very different to them. He's still a first rounder. So that is why if you're drafting at the top and you're drafting one of those guys, and Luka is still quite high, you don't need to decide on your punt until you figure out who you're getting with your second, third, and even fourth pick. Now, last thing I wanted to touch on is what do we want to punt with specific players? So this is, I guess, having a look at the first round and the top, I don't know, I want to say top 5, top 6 is pretty set at the moment. Order will change, but I just thought we'd rattle off a few players and let's say, okay, what's our favorite punt with this player? And let's start with Jokic because he is a tough one. What's your preferred punt if you've got the number 1 pick, for example, and you take Jokic? What would you typically end up punting?
Punt threes is my first, and my backup would be punt blocks. Punt threes with Jokic, it's almost overpowered. It won my main league like 4 to 5 years, which is really annoying because the league just came down to who got Jokic kind of, and because they follow my site, they follow my guides, so they're doing punt threes properly. And then the other year, I won with Embiid in punt threes. So I think that build with Jokic is pretty powerful. Punt blocks is great though too. Like if I got it this year, I'd probably just kind of see how the draft went and go from there. I'm finding punt blocks pretty easy to pull off this year, and punt threes not so much. But we'll see again. We're dealing with early September rankings right now, so who knows? That's
right. Yeah. Wemby. So he's a little, I want to say he's a little bit more of a traditional big, in terms of the blocks, he is. But there is one category that he's not as traditional, and that's field goal percentage. What would be your preferred punt for him?
In 8-cat, definitely field goal percentage because you don't got to worry about the turnovers.
Yeah.
In 9-cat, I still lean punt field goal percentage, but you could make a good argument for punt assist as well. It doesn't give you the field goal percentage that you need, but generally in punt assist, because it's a little big, heavy, field goal percentage isn't an issue. And then it kind of gives you everything elsewhere. So I would say punt field goal is probably my first choice, and then punt assist second. I don't worry as much about the competition for punt field goal percentage. Like if I have Wemby, I don't worry about there being another like 3 or 4 punt field goal percentage teams.
Yeah.
Because the issue with punt field goal percentage teams is not finding enough guards, it's finding enough bigs. And if you start with Wemby, that's not going to be an issue.
No, that's right. And that is something I would say if you are punting multiple categories, and if you can categorize your punt as a big punt or a guard punt or whatever that is, so for example, that the one that I use where I just go really guard heavy and just target assists and steals and points, that sort of thing. Generally speaking, that build is built for guards. So it's hard to find centers, power forwards potentially that fit that build. Don't wait until too late. So maybe with your 4th pick, even though you might have to draft someone that in your build is the 100th ranked, like a Miles Turner, for example, is not a terrible fit for that build. You may need to still draft him in the 3rd round because if you just ignore centers, you're then in a position where it's the 8th round and there's no one on the board that you want to take, and you end up having to draft Al Horford or someone like that as your starting center. So I would still make sure that you're filling your positions, despite the fact that you might go, this guy is not a great fit, but like Pascal Siakam is one I did last year. I took him because he's center eligible. There was someone else who was weirdly center eligible. I can't think who it was. So do check your league sort of position allocations before you draft, just so that you can find those players that have a position eligibility that really makes no sense, but for you it helps. Shea, what would you punt if you landed Shea in the draft?
Anything. He's the best because he just gives you unlimited punting options. Generally punt threes just because again those bigs get such a boost. But I mean he's a dream fit for punt assist. Like he's easily the best punt assist guy too. So I'd be pretty tempted by that one. Yeah, those would be my top 2.
Okay, so top 3 they're pretty set. I think they're pretty consensus when it comes to who we're taking. Luka is, I think people are liking him at pick number 4 this year.
Yeah.
Now he's a little bit easier than Shea to find a punt strategy. What are you choosing if you get Luka?
Usually punt free throw percentage, not because he's mediocre from the line, but because he brings everything that those punt free throw percentage guys don't. Punt field goal percentage is the other one I consider, but with Luka, I lean punt free throw percentage just to avoid having to compete for like the Miles Turners of the world. Like you might get stuck at the end of a big man run in punt field goal percentage and be out of luck, or have like Porzingis as your top big, which is pretty dicey. But you're probably not going to miss out on Pirtle or Walker Kessler. Like those guys are going to go around their ADP, and you can always reach around and still get great value.
Okay, then it starts to open up a little bit. I think Giannis has been going in this range, 5, 6. He's a pretty obvious one. Punt free throws. I mean, any argument there?
No, it's really just like, are you going to punt threes on top of free throw?
Yeah,
that's because you can't offset his free throw percentage hit. So it's really just, do I do a single punt or a double punt?
Yeah. And I mean, I hear that talked about a little bit on shows. People sort of trying to say, if you get Giannis with your first pick, you don't have to punt free throws. You can draft players later to sort of make up for it. For me, that's just almost a recipe for disaster in some respects, because you are then actively chasing free throws to the detriment of other categories which would benefit having Giannis. So
yeah, you're weakening yourself in the 8 other categories to boost one. It makes no sense. And at the end of the day, it's not like you're going to end up shooting 82, 83% of the line. You might shoot 79, 9, which is going to get you the win 45% of the time, maybe.
Yeah. So fairly easy one there. So let's just have a look at a few other names quickly, and then I'll let you get out of here. So I don't know. Let's turn that punt off so I can see. Who are some popular targets? Let's have a look at Anthony Davis, who typically goes in the first round. And he is someone, as I said, I love him in that punt assists, threes kind of a build. What would you have a preferred strategy for him?
Yeah, no, same thing. Punt threes, punt assists. I kind of view him as a mini SGA, just a big man version, and not quite as potent on a per game basis. You can literally do anything with it. You could do punt points with the AD pretty well too. He'd be a nice one for that as well.
Yep. Let's have a look at who else. I mean, James Harden. Do I want to talk about him? Yeah. Well, let's go James Harden. He's a funny one because he's sort of changed a little bit in the last 4 years. He's probably an okay punt points target now, where 3, 4, 5 years ago, whatever it was, he was certainly not a punt points target.
Yeah, that's the problem with Harden, because the obvious thing is to put him into punt field goal percentage, because then you don't got to worry about his field goal percentage and probably his turnovers as well. You just punt both. But then he's going to be the worst source of points inside of the top 15. So then which is a category that drives up quickly. So then you have to offset that early. Like overall value will be really nice, but he's a little tricky to build around in punt field goal percentage. I'd probably still lean that way, but I would definitely just come up with a draft plan for punt points just in case.
Yeah, and as you said, if you land Harden in the first round, he is one of the worst points producers in that top 15, top 18, which would then mean that someone like, as I said, a Cam Thomas becomes a little bit more appealing later in a draft, because that's someone who's going to get arguably more points than James Harden, but also won't help you in assists or steals, those categories that Harden is good in. Trae Young, we talked about him. I find him quite easy to punt with, because he is sort of your typical point guard. He gets you point guard stats and he gets nothing else.
Yeah. The only issue I have with Trae is that his rebounds and blocks are like exceptionally low for a guard. So it's like we expect our guys not to do much in the category, but his are exceptionally low. So it just puts a little more pressure on you to get those few bigs that do fit punt field goal percentage well. But I do like Trae in general.
Another one, I think a guy who historically he's a little bit in that Shea discussion of just really good across multiple categories, is Kevin Durant. So he's certainly much older now, so he's not as good in a lot of categories, but still, I mean, if you look at his sort of just his stats across the board here, he is sort of a tricky one as well. What would be a viable strategy, you think, for Kevin Durant? If you were getting him, I mean, you wouldn't be taking him at pick 7 or anything, I wouldn't think, but possibly pick 12 on the turn.
Yeah, he's an option in that range for sure. KD, you can definitely do a lot of things. I like him in punt assists because his percentages are so good. He had a fluky year from the line last year, but he should bounce back this year. Punt assists is ideally going to be good in both percentages. That's kind of part of the appeal. So he's nice there. I also like him in punt threes. Like he's
Mm.
the percentage is always nice, but he doesn't put up a massive number. Like his reputation is a little overstated with his 3-point shooting. So he's not losing too much value there. And you think, okay, a punt threes build is going to probably struggle in points and free throw percentage because you're going to be targeting a lot of those bigs who are kind of traditional types. And KD's still going to be extremely good in that. So those would probably be my 1-2. I mean, he's always been weak in steals, but in general, steals isn't punting build. I'm going to look at that. For me, that's more like a mid-draft pivot. If all of a sudden I'm finding myself really weak in the category and I don't want to depend on those specialists late, like the Case and Wallace and Keon Ellis types who don't give you much elsewhere.
Yeah. Yep. All right, a couple of, I guess, buzzy names, and then we'll jump out of here. Amen Thompson. So he's someone we talked about. I landed him almost everywhere last year, and this year I'm not sure that's going to be the case because he's going
now
a
I'm just
higher.
looking at Asar. Yeah,
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So for Amen, I mean, he is a really good punt points guy. Any other categories you consider punting if you had Amen?
Yeah, I kind of just I can fit. I find I'm okay fitting him into a lot of things just because I kind of view him as big. I know he's going to play shooting guard this year, but I look at him as a guy who has most of his value in field goal percentage, rebounds, and blocks. So while his value is going to spike the most with punt points or punt threes, I'm not scared to put him into like punt assists where he loses a little bit of value just because he gives me the big man numbers and steals that I need. So I think you have some flexibility there. I think, yeah, obviously not punt field goal percentage, but there's not too many builds where I would just say no to Thompson.
Yeah, and I think, as you said, he is going to play shooting guard, but and his assists are fine, so he will get sort of above average assists. But they also have Şengün, they also have Van Fleet, they also have Durant now, so the ball is going to be everywhere. It's going to be handled by a lot of players. So yeah, I think punting assists is okay for him as well. Jalen Johnson, who is probably another guy that people are a little bit unsure of where to draft him. I've seen him go as high as, well, I've taken him sort of on the turn in certain punt builds. Coming off a sort of an injury-plagued season, I suppose. A lot of hype around him, though. What would you look at for him?
Yeah, he's pretty similar to Amen, where he kind of puts a center-ish line with some guard categories sprinkled in a little bit. So similar thing where it's like punt free throw percentage, maybe punt points, punt threes kind of deal.
And last one, Cooper Flagg. Where's he going in drafts? It's all over the place at the moment. It's sort of settling into around the 40 range, I think. We haven't seen him play yet, but what would you consider if you were targeting him? And this would be a little bit later in draft, so you'd be getting him in third or fourth round. So you may have decided on your strategy by then, or he may determine your strategy. So what's best for him?
I don't know about best, but I think he's going to be really good in punt field goal percentage because, like most rookies, he's probably not going to shoot a great percentage, and he's going to be forced on the perimeter more just because of Dallas's roster. So I don't think he's going to be great in field goal percentage, but he's going to be a really good block source and rebound source for his position. So that kind of makes him a natural fit as a quasi big in punt field goal percentage. Don't mind him in punt threes. I don't know if I 100% trust his three ball just yet. Punt points will be probably pretty good as well. But he's a pretty versatile guy. I think if you really like Flagg, you can go for him in most spots. Yeah,
he could end up being one of those guys who's just sort of average in everything. I think he'll have the ball in his hands, so his assists are going to be pretty good. He'll get some rebounds. He'll hit a 1.53, something like that. Percentages will be decent. I do think, as you said, field goal percentage might be the one there for him. All right, so that's all the players. Now I completely forgot the FanDuel ad read because we've been talking about punting, but I know I was looking at FanDuel, and this isn't a betting show by any means, but now that I've had to read about FanDuel, I actually, and I'd never bet. I don't know. Do you bet? I don't.
I've
put
gone through
money on.
phases. Generally not with the NBA though. When I go through phases, it's college ball mostly, just because I find the odds are a little easier, like, to find some
Yeah,
good
okay.
deals. Yeah.
So I was looking at just regular season wins and who's favourite for divisions, and one, or actually two, jumped out at me, and I just thought I'd get your thoughts on it. So for the Central Division, not the winner necessarily, but for the team projected to come fourth and fifth in the Central Division are the Pacers and the Bulls. And the Bulls are actually favoured to come fifth quite comfortably. I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on the Pacers this year? Because I know, like, people are talking about them, it's basically a year off for them with no Halliburton. I actually think Chicago will probably, as they typically do, they're going to try to win for whatever reason. So I would actually think that the Pacers may lose the most games in that division.
Yeah, they could. It's funny because they're such an offensive team, but you look at it and it's like Pascal is the number one guy. Kind of saw it with the Raptors. It didn't work amazing. And I know some people are high on Nembhard, but like offensively, he's not awesome. So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, they don't really have a center right now. Like I do like Isaiah Jackson. I think Isaiah Jackson will be all right once he ramps up, but it could take a while. I know some people are hyping Jay Huff, but I'm like, this is a 28-year-old guy who's never been in rotation. So I don't know how you can see him as dependable. So I would probably take Chicago. The only thing that makes me question Chicago is if they're going to move Vooch eventually. Yeah. Like he could, like last year wasn't really tradable because he had 2 years left, but this year he's expiring, and then, or if you get a buyout after it, then you bring in. I mean, they had some good backup options, but it could be a little dicey, at least on the offensive end. So I lean Chicago, but I think there's definitely some question marks there.
And then the other one that sort of jumped out, well, not jumped out at me necessarily, but the Northwest, which is pretty loaded at the top with the Thunder, Nuggets, and Wolves. But then it's the Blazers and the Jazz, and they've actually got the Blazers and the Jazz equal in betting at the moment for most losses. For me, I think Portland are on the up, and Utah are just sort of Utah. They're just who they are. So I'm surprised at that. That's
shocking to me. Danny Ainge will be devastated if Utah wins as many games as Portland. Like that would be seen as a very bad season in Utah. Yeah, I don't see that one at all. A lot of the times, like these teams going up, they don't keep going up. But for the Blazers to drop back to Utah's level, I don't know. Like what would happen? I guess Denny would have to go down, and they just have no offense. I think that's the only scenario. And then they decide to go for it for the tank. But again, like Utah is going to be rookies. Walker Kessler probably misses a bunch of games. Laurie's probably done after February. So yeah, I don't see that one.
Yeah, that was a strange one as well. But anyway, head over to FanDuel and have a look at some of those odds and get some money on there. I am going to let you go now. Thanks for coming on again. Remind everyone just where they can find you and your stuff.
Yeah, you can find me at elitefantasybasketball.com. I put out some free stuff, but it's also a subscriber site. I'll also be tweeting a bunch, but most of the good stuff is going to be on the site, and most of the good stuff is going to be coming out almost every day. A lot of unique content on the site too that you won't find anywhere else. So if you subscribe to the site in the past, you know what I'm talking about. But for those who are looking to take their fantasy game up a notch, it's worth checking out for sure.
Absolutely is. Head over there and subscribe and get a leg up. Always looking for a leg up nowadays. Thank you for coming on. Remind everyone, go and like and subscribe and do all of that stuff that you need to do to keep me and to keep Dan happy. He's Adam Stock. I'm Adam King. You've been listening to Stuff It, a fantasy basketball podcast. We are done.